All right, let's dive into the mystery surrounding Robert Johnson. A blues legend, shrouded in myth and tales of, you know, crossroads, demons, and this sudden burst of genius on the guitar.
It's a story that never gets old.
It doesn't, does it? So, what's our mission today? I think we got to sift through the myths, analyze the music, and really try to understand what made Robert Johnson so groundbreaking.
Well, for me, the starting point has to be the Mississippi Delta. I mean, that's the birthplace of the blues, right?
Yeah.
And its influence on Johnson's sound is undeniable.
Yeah, from what I've read, the Delta was like this incredible melting pot of musical influences. I mean, what was it about this specific region that birthed such a powerful art form?
Well, you'd have to think about the mix of cultures there. The hardship, the resilience of the people. It created this fertile ground for the blues to flourish. African-American musical traditions blending with work songs, spirituals, folk ballads. It all comes together in this raw, emotional form of expression.
And Johnson was born right into the heart of it. But his childhood, it wasn't easy, was it? I know there's even some debate about his actual birthplace.
Yeah, there's a bit of mystery surrounding those early years, for sure. Some sources say Hazelhurst, Mississippi. Others suggest Robinsonville, maybe even Gopia County. But regardless of the exact location, he grew up surrounded by the blues, absorbing it all from a young age.
And I read that his stepfather was a musician. Was that his first real taste of playing, do you think?
It's definitely possible. We don't have a complete picture of those early years, unfortunately. But it seems very likely that his stepfather's musical background played a role in shaping that initial interest.
Okay, but here's where things take a turn for the supernatural, right? The story goes that Johnson was, at first, like a pretty mediocre guitar player. Then he disappears for a while.
Yeah.
When he comes back, bam, he's this phenomenal musician. It's like a blues fairy tale.
The legend of the crossroads. A tale so deeply embedded in Southern folklore, in the blues tradition.
Chills, literal chills.
This image of the crossroads as a place where the natural and supernatural worlds collide, where deals can be made, destinies altered.
It's powerful stuff.
But especially within the context of the blues, where hardship, struggle, and the search for solace are those recurring themes.
Okay, gotta ask, do you think there's any truth to it?
Well, a literal deal with the devil may be a bit far-fetched, but I think the crossroads story speaks to something deeper. It's a metaphor, isn't it, for the sacrifices artists often make. The dedication, the relentless pursuit of their craft, pushing boundaries, defying expectations, maybe even tapping into something beyond the ordinary.
So not so much about a literal devil, but more like the metaphorical demons we all wrestle with when chasing our passions.
Exactly.
I like that.
It's about confronting those inner demons, the doubts, the fears, and emerging transformed. And in Johnson's case, that transformation was undeniable. He didn't just improve, he evolved, took the blues he'd learned and crafted something entirely new.
And speaking of those he learned from, Son House and Charlie Patton. They were huge in the Delta blues scene, weren't they? Could they have been influences on Johnson's style?
Absolutely. Both giants of the Delta blues,
Yeah.
known for their raw, powerful styles. Son House especially had a direct connection to Johnson. He even expressed astonishment at Johnson's rapid improvement. So, yes, you can definitely hear their influence. But the remarkable thing is how Johnson took those elements and created something completely unique.
So what made his playing so innovative then? It can't just be the myth, right?
Not at all. When you listen to songs like Hellhound on My Trail, for instance, you hear that intricate fingerpicking. It creates this relentless rhythm, like a heartbeat propelling the song forward. And then there's the slide guitar, adding this mournful, almost vocal quality.
I get chills every time I hear it.
But what really sets him apart is the way he uses chords and progressions. He was daring, creating dissonance and tension, adding a haunting darkness that wasn't typical in traditional blues, like his use of diminished chords in Hellhound on My Trail. They create this sense of unease, of urgency. It was quite revolutionary for the time.
He was pushing the genre forward, even back then. I have to admit, though, whenever I hear crossroad blues, I still get caught up in that crossroads story. It's just too good to ignore.
And that's the power of myth, isn't it? It sticks with you, adds that extra layer of intrigue. But even without the legend, Johnson's music speaks for itself. The emotional depth, those haunting melodies, the poetry in his lyrics. He was a true innovator, a visionary who redefined the possibilities of the blues.
And to think all of this incredible talent wasn't widely recognized during his lifetime. It was more of a word-of-mouth thing, right? Playing juke joints, traveling the South, but not exactly selling out stadiums.
Sadly, that was the reality for many black musicians in the segregated South back then. Limited opportunities, playing in small venues, often for very little pay. It really reflects the systemic racism and lack of access they faced in the music industry.
It makes you wonder what he could have achieved if he hadn't faced those barriers, how his music might have evolved. But even within those limitations, he left behind a legacy that still inspires musicians today.
Absolutely. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive, the enduring legacy of Robert Johnson, how his music transcended time and genre, and his profound impact on some of the biggest names in rock and roll.
It's really amazing how Robert Johnson's music, born out of those specific circumstances in the Mississippi Delta, became this global phenomenon. How did someone playing juke joints in the segregated South end up influencing some of the biggest names in rock and roll?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable when you think about it. To really grasp Johnson's enduring legacy, I think we need to go beyond just the myths and really dive into the music itself. It wasn't simply raw talent, it was innovation, depth, and an almost uncanny ability to tap into those universal human emotions.
We talked about his guitar technique earlier, but can we unpack that a bit more? What exactly made his playing so groundbreaking?
Well, let's take a song like Love in Vain, for example. You hear that mournful slide guitar weaving through the melody, creating this achingly beautiful texture. But then pay attention to how he uses his thumb to create this driving bass line, all while simultaneously picking out those intricate melodies with his fingers. That complex finger-picking technique allowed him to create this really rich, layered sound. It was way ahead of its time.
It's like he's playing two guitars at once, almost.
Exactly. And then you add in his use of open tunings, unconventional chord voicings. He wasn't afraid to bend the rules, to create these dissonant, almost jazzy chords. They add this haunting quality to his music. You can really hear that in Preaching Blues.
Right.
Where he uses those dissonant chords to create a sense of unease, of tension.
Yeah.
Perfectly reflecting the song's themes of, sin and redemption.
So he was already pushing the boundaries of blues harmony back then, in a way that foreshadowed later musical development.
Oh, absolutely. You can hear echoes of Johnson's harmonic innovations in the music of later blues artists, like Muddy Waters, even in the early rock and roll of Chuck Berry.
Yeah, but it wasn't just about the technique, though, right?
Yeah.
Johnson's music had this raw emotional power that went beyond just blues.
Exactly.
It's something deeper.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard Hellhound on My Trail. I mean, it wasn't just a song. It was like a force of nature, this primal scream of despair and longing.
His lyrics are just as powerful, often poetic and infused with this vivid imagery drawn from his own life experiences and, of course, from Southern folklore.
He sang about love, loss, good, evil, the struggles of everyday life.
The search for meaning in a world that often felt cruel and unforgiving.
And those themes resonated with people, far beyond just the Delta blues scene.
Right, because it tapped into something universal about the human experience.
Exactly.
That's why his music resonated so deeply with those who rediscovered it in the 1960s, especially during that blues revival. Musicians like Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Bob Dylan, they were all blown away by Johnson's music. They heard something raw, authentic, deeply moving. That spoke to their own artistic sensibilities.
I know Clapton has said that Johnson's slide guitar playing on Crossroad Blues was a direct inspiration for his own style. It's incredible to think how one musician can have such a ripple effect across generations.
It really is a testament to the power of originality and authenticity. Johnson wasn't trying to fit in, he was just expressing himself, pouring his heart and soul into his music, and that's what connected with so many people, including some of the most influential musicians of the 20th century.
And they weren't just imitating, they were inspired, right? They heard a blueprint for raw emotional expression in Johnson's music that they could adapt and make their own.
Exactly. They saw this fierce independence, this willingness to push boundaries, to create something new and meaningful out of the blues, and that continues to inspire musicians today. You can still hear those echoes of Johnson's influence in contemporary blues, rock, even folk music.
Like a seed that keeps growing and branching out.
It's what makes studying his legacy so fascinating. He wasn't just a great musician, he was a catalyst, a spark that ignited the imaginations of so many others.
To think that this musical lineage traces back to this young man playing on street corners in the Mississippi Delta.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is a reminder that sometimes the most profound impact comes from the most unexpected places.
It really is. And while Johnson's fame came after he was gone, his story highlights the importance of recognizing and nurturing talent wherever you find it. Who knows how many other Robert Johnsons are out there, waiting for their chance to be heard to inspire future generations.
It's a good question, but for now, I'm curious about the man himself. We've talked about the myth, the music, the legacy, But what about Robert Johnson, the person? What can we glean about his personality, his relationships, the things that shaped him beyond just the music?
It's a great question. And it's one we'll definitely delve into in the final part of our deep dive, trying to separate the man from the myth, explore what we know about his personal life, his struggles, and those complex forces that shaped his art.
So we've gone deep into Robert Johnson's journey, from those dusty Mississippi roads to his mark on music. We talked about his guitar style, his lyrics that just grab you. But who was he, really? I mean, beyond the legend, beyond the myth, the crossroads, all of that. Who was Robert Johnson?
It's a question that keeps everyone thinking, historians, fans, everyone. But getting to the real him is hard. We only have bits and pieces, stories, glimpses into his life, a life cut way too short. But we can use those pieces to try and understand this complex, fascinating guy.
I've read stories from people who actually knew him. And it's strange, the descriptions. Sometimes they say he was charismatic, charming, but then others say withdrawn, brooding. How do we make sense of that?
Well, we got to remember, Johnson was a person, just like us. He probably had lots of different sides to him, the sides that came out at different times with different people. And we have to think about what his life was like. A young, talented black musician in the South in the 1930s. That world, it wasn't easy, full of limits and danger.
So all that pressure, that could have made him guarded, made him pull back, keep to himself.
It's possible, yeah. It's not hard to see how all that weight from society, from his own life, how it could lead someone to be more introspective. And those struggles often came out in his music, like in Me and the Devil Blues. It's not just a scary story. It's like looking into a troubled mind, dealing with temptation, with guilt, maybe even with wanting to self-destruct.
Yeah, there's definitely darkness there, this feeling of unease you can't shake.
And it wasn't just the music. His own life had a lot of turbulence, too.
Right, he was married twice. Both ended in separation. And there are hints of other relationships, too. Do you think those romantic struggles, they found their way into his music?
It's hard to know for sure, but his lyrics, they're so personal. It seems like all those relationships, the good and the bad, they probably did end up in his songs. There's a real vulnerability there in how he talks about love and loss. It makes you feel like those emotions were so real for him, like in love in vain. Yeah. It's heartbreaking, but love gone wrong, and you can hear it all. The pain, the feeling of betrayal, the longing.
That one always gets to me, like he's putting his whole being into every single word.
Exactly. And that's why his music still matters. He wasn't afraid to feel those raw emotions and let everyone see his vulnerable side. And by doing that, he made something truly human, something we can all connect with.
But even with all we've learned, that mystery around Robert Johnson, it's still there. We know so little about his everyday life, what he thought, what he dreamed of. It's almost like he disappeared into thin air, leaving us with these recordings and a story full of myths and guesses.
And that's part of what makes him so interesting, He's caught between history and legend, between fact and what we make up. We'll never know everything about him, but that makes him even more appealing. It lets us see his life and music through our own lens, to fill in the gaps with our imagination.
So the mystery itself becomes part of what he left behind.
I think so. It makes us engage with his music on a deeper level, to listen for more than just the notes, to hear echoes of a life lived on the edges, a life full of passion, of pain, and this almost supernatural talent.
And that talent, it broke through all the limits he faced.
It did.
It went beyond time and place, inspiring so many people.
It speaks to how powerful music is, how it can connect us across generations and cultures.
As we wrap this up, I think it's clear, Robert Johnson remains a puzzle, a musical enigma that keeps us fascinated and inspired. We may never know the full truth about his life, or how he became such a master of the guitar, but his music, it gives us a glimpse into a soul that was troubled but also brilliant.
Yeah, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the most important thing is the music itself, those melodies that stay with you, the lyrics that paint pictures. They keep talking to us across the decades, reminding us of how powerful human expression can be and how strong the legacy of this bluesman is, this man who walked that line between myth and reality.
That's a great way to put it. And we encourage you to explore Robert Johnson's music yourself. Really listen to his songs. Let them take you to those crossroads and let them speak to your soul. You might discover something new about him, about the man, the myth, the legend. That is Robert Johnson.